this area is in a lot better shape than you are.
Visit my kids and grandkids.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Thursday, January 24th meeting of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. And with that, we will have public announcements.
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item number 1 is approval of the minutes, and there are no minutes, so we'll move on to agenda item number 2, consideration of subdivision committee recommendations. Item 2.1 is sub 2018-0047, one-step final plat for Cedar Valley Estates Edition. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Yes? Okay. We will hear that case. Moving on to agenda item number 3, public hearing vacation items. Item 3.1, VAC 2018-0033, city vacation of front setback and side street setback for building expansion on property zoned LC. Is there anybody from the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent. Item 3.2, VAC 2018-0034, city vacation of a portion of Meade Avenue between 11th Street and 13th Street to prohibit through traffic for safety and security reasons between property zoned LI. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent.
A motion now. I move we approve items 3.1 and 3.2.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve agenda items 3.1 and 3.2. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 4, case number DR DER 2018-00016. Is there anybody on the commission that would like to hear that case? Okay, we will hear that case. Item number 5, CON 2018-00045, city conditional use to permit a transfer station for medical waste on property zoned LI. Is there anybody from the commission that would like to hear that case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, we'll take that item on consent.
We would take item 5 by consent.
Yes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to take item number 5 on consent. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, let's go back to agenda item number 2.1 and ready for a presentation.
Neil Straw, Planning Staff. Item 2-1 is Cedar Valley Estates Edition. This is a county plat located on the east side of 231st West. North of Kellogg. Zoning is RR, Rural Residential. It's in the Goddard urban area of influence, and Goddard informed staff they're not planning to extend facilities to this property. Access controls were addressed at last week's subdivision committee. 3 openings along 231st were proposed. The one to the north, there was some discussion since the applicant is providing a private drive within an access easement, that was deemed to be okay by the subdivision committee in lieu of a reserve. That also along the north is a contingent street dedication. It's a half street dedication, a 35-foot half street dedication. The other half would come from the adjoining property to the north. When that is developed, and that this contingent street dedication also extends to the east line of the plat to allow for future development of this property to the east. And the subdivision committee unanimously recommended the plat's approval. Questions for staff?
Questions from the commission? Okay. Seeing none, agent or applicant, would you like to step forward and present? You have 10 minutes, and if you would state your name and address, we would appreciate it.
Mark Savoy, Savoy Company, Land Surveyors, agent for the applicant, 433 South Hydraulics, the address. We're in agreement with staff comments.
Any questions from the commission? Nope. Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Sir, if you'll state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Michael Roush. I represent the Garden Plain Township on the board of, I'm on the board of directors. I am the trustee for the township. We do have a couple questions regarding the access to this property. When it was first known to us that this was going to be developed out, we were told it was going to be 3 houses, and when they put an application in with the county, they told us we needed to put 2 culverts in. We did. We put 2 steel or a culvert or a, what do you want to call it, corrugated culverts in. And now we find out that there's going to be, could be a total of 8 houses plus all the work that's going to be done with that. Our concern is that those culverts we put in are not going to be heavy enough to handle that kind of traffic plus that kind of heavy loads. We're afraid that the roads aren't going to be able to handle the amount of traffic plus the weight of the trucks coming in to build the houses, build the roads and everything on that. The other thing we have a concern is the access road 231st is a very narrow road. Right now there's a 25-foot easement on the very south half of that. Plus there's a narrow bridge at the corner, which is a KDOT bridge, and it's very narrow. And to be able to handle that traffic the way it needs to be done, we're going to have to widen that road at some point to be able to handle that kind of traffic safely. And we do not have it in our budget, nor have we planned on putting that in our budget. And to build a road to handle that kind of traffic, plus school buses, emergency vehicles, we're just afraid it's going to put a strain on our budget. So we would ask that the applicant, the owner applicant, would be in charge of helping us to provide funds to rebuild this road up. You have any questions?
Any questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson?
Maybe, Neil, you could put the aerial photo back up. You could show us, have him show us with the mouse where those constricted points are that we can understand where the work's been done and where you say there's a 35-foot access and those kinds of things, if you could help us understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. It does not show the current culverts that we've put in, but one is approximately in this location here.
Whoops, there we go. That's a
Oh, I'm
touchy
sorry, I messed
situation.
up again.
Yeah, we get that all the time.
That's that, and I did.
Yeah, just hold it like that.
Okay, there's one approximately right in here. And in the north half of the first property, there's another we've put in two 30-foot culverts. So a 30-foot culvert and a narrow road, they're going to be driving off the end of it and collapsing them down. We would appreciate if they would be responsible in putting in concrete culverts. They will stand the weight of the trucks better, and it would be a better culvert in the long run. Plus, the roads at this point are not built, so I mean it's really a hazard getting in and out of there. Plus, 231st. Where's this? From 54 Highway, right here at this intersection, there's a very narrow KDOT bridge, which the county or us do not have control of. So somehow, and then until the first property, end of this property here, there's only 25-foot right-of-way. And when you get to these properties all the way up to the half-mile line, then it jumps to another 35-foot of right-of-way. So to try to build a road, you're narrowing it up there, and then try to widen it out makes it extremely difficult for us to try to maintain and keep a road like that in condition.
So you're saying that south of this property, between this property and Kellogg, there's only a 35-foot of right-of-way?
Correct. Well, it's actually lower than that. It's only a 25-foot. It's only a 40-foot. Yeah, it's 40-foot, excuse me.
And
it's a very narrow road. I mean, if you meet a school bus on the road with a piece of farm machinery, because that's a very agricultural area, somebody's going to have to drive off the edge of the road.
I guess I'd have a staff question here. Who's responsible for upgrading the road? Is that the township's problem? Is that, I mean, I know we have some limits if we have a certain number of people that live there, but
Once there's 20 lots, that's cumulatively on that mile portion of the road, that's when the requirement kicks in.
But that's a requirement to pave it, as I recall, Neil. It's not, I'm talking about just improving this. I mean, 30-foot culvert, pretty narrow. Yeah, that's my question is between now and when it gets paved. Looks like the counselor's ready to help us here.
Justin Wagoner, to your question, Commissioner Richardson, I think that at this point it's the township's responsibility, which is I think why they're here today. Responsible for the roads.
And Neil, help me. Was there 6 lots there we're talking about, or on the plat? Is there 5? I can't remember now.
8 lots.
8 lots.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And so the concern is that the traffic. What happens north of the site? Is it the same restricted right of way?
Yes.
And it's obviously all sand or gravel or something.
Yeah, it's a sand road, dirt road.
Something now. Okay.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Green?
Yes, on the street right-of-way, there's only 25 foot of right-of-way. Is that half street or is that?
A half street. Until you get to the first lot or first subdivision there, it's only a 40-foot right-of-way on both. Well, the west side of the street actually got moved over. That's platted out. The east side did not get moved over.
But there's surely more than just 25 foot of right-of-way, full street right-of-way, correct?
Right.
Okay.
It's a 40-foot right-of-way a 25 foot on that half street. You're right, 20 foot on that half street. On the west side of the street, yeah, there's more right of way. But to keep the road running straight, we have, you know, to maintain our boundaries.
Now, can you explain to the commission how and what triggers culverts being put in and the locations of those culverts and the size and dimension?
Well, they have to apply to the county for permission to put a driveway culvert in. The county comes out and looks at the culvert, establishes flow lines. At the first point, there was only going to be 3 lots. So we were looking at 2 houses and then an additional house on the north side. And all of a sudden this gets changed. We're looking at 8 houses. So the 3 houses would have been tough on the regular culverts anyway, but you double that or, you know, increase that amount of traffic, especially the heavy cement trucks. There's only like maybe 3 inches of cover on top of those culverts. What we put in would match the flow rate and the culverts that's in there. And we put in what the county recommended, which was a 21 by 15 squash culvert.
Mr. Hartman.
So who asked you to put the culverts in the first place?
The lot owner, which was Mr. Rush.
This was
He applies to the county to do all that.
before,
Yeah, yeah. He's an ex-county employee. He knows this a whole lot better than I do.
Okay, he's just answering a question. You can do that. Okay.
I'm Joe Hoheisel, I'm the treasurer. Okay, when a person applies for a culvert, if it's a residential, that's one house, we put a metal culvert in for them. But when you go from one residence to multi-residence, it becomes a commercial lot. And our culverts were never made for these big trucks and stuff when you got multi-houses in there, because the culverts are, well, basically the culvert's only 30 foot long. So these big trucks start coming in there and they drive off the end and smash these culverts. Once we've installed them and the resident or whoever has paid for them, we're responsible for them. So every time they get smashed, it's going to cost us $650 or better to replace that culvert, plus man hours and stuff like that. They were never made to handle concrete trucks day in and day out. They were made, you know, when the house is built, which normally on a home site, we put a plug in there until the house is built, just dirt. So when the heavy trucks go by, they don't smash the culvert. When the house is done, we dig the dirt back out, we install the culvert for the residents, and it's all done. That way we don't have any heavy trucks on that culvert, because they were never made to stand that kind of weight. And when you build houses, you know, you have semis and stuff bringing rafters and stuff like that. 30-foot culvert is not long enough for a semi, because our road is not wide. They can't make a sweeping turn. They're going to drive off in that culvert and they're going to smash it, and we're going to be responsible. So every time they build a house, eventually we're going to be replacing them culverts. And our budget is tight enough the way it is without having to pay for culverts every 6-8 months, because a new house gets built and they smash the culvert again. So normally, I know with the county, at one time, that's what my boss told me, that when they build residential, the person that's responsible for the subdivision, they put a concrete culvert in, and they're usually 36 to 40 foot long, so that semis and whatever can get in there without driving off the end of them. So basically, we're just trying to avoid our cost, because until those houses are all built, we're going to be putting culverts in right and left.
so if you would have known ahead of time that there was going to be 8 lots, you would have put in a heavier duty culvert and a longer one?
Well, we would have told the gentleman that you become a commercial deal, you're going to have your contractor or whoever you have build your road, put that culvert in for you. Is basically normally the way they do it, to my notion is, but I don't know exactly all the county rules and stuff, but to me, when I worked for the county, my boss always told me, well, when they go to multi-family, it's not residential anymore. It becomes a commercial thing because there's going to be more than one home using that driveway or road. I don't know whether the fire department has anything to say about how long the culvert's got to be either.
Was the property owner responsible for the cost of the culvert and the type of culvert?
On first installation, the property owner is responsible for that culvert. So
he pays for it, but you maintain it.
Right, after we've installed it, we maintain it after that. But if, if it gets smashed and stuff like that, we got to replace it at our cost. So, when you start putting multi-houses in there and there's going to be a lot of traffic, and there has to be a road built. So it's always been made that the contractor who builds that road puts a concrete lock joint culvert in there. So that way it doesn't get smashed, because it's a big expense to the entity that has to care for the roads and stuff. And like my partner said here, our road is not very wide, so those semis that go in there.
So the landowner obviously contacted you and said that he was just building one house and you just needed a smaller.
That's the way we understood it. There was going to be one house on each one of these driveways. We didn't know they were going to be multi-subdivision or plotted out lots. So that was our understanding when we put the driveways in there. It was just going to be one house on each of one of those driveways. So
a question by Mr. Joe Johnson and one by Mr. Bill Johnson. So
what is your solution?
What is our solution? Well, we'd like to, when they start building or whatever, their roads and stuff, have their contractor put a concrete culvert in. We'll take ours back out and refund his money to him, because we'll take the culvert back, or if he wants to use it somewhere else in the division, it's his culvert. And we'll install it for him in the division after it's built. But the entrance to that thing needs to be concrete. And we don't install concrete culverts.
Bill Johnson? No?
Clarified.
Okay. Mr. Richardson?
Just to be clear here, these culverts we're talking about are entrances into private property. They're not culverts on 231st Street itself. Is that right?
They are on 231st Street that enter into these lots.
Okay, so they're on the side.
They're on the side of 231st.
Right. So if you just drive
each
on
one of these lots.
If you just drive on 231st, we're not going over any of these new culverts. These are just entrances into the private lots.
These are the entrances gone into the subdivision.
All right, thank you.
And that's where we want the concrete culverts to be, the entrances into the subdivision. No, they're not on 231 at all. They're in the ditch going into these subdivisions.
Department, do you have another question?
Another question. Do you know if there are buses that travel on this road now? There are?
Buses and mail routes.
So I had a question a while ago. Is this going to be a private road? Because
On rebuttal.
Sir, you'll have to wait, please.
Get your rebuttal.
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
well, I'm done bothering you.
Mr. Klossmeyer?
I have explained our part of it, so.
My understanding from subdivision was that there was one culvert serving two lots. So there was 4 lots alongside 231st, and there was 2 culverts, one of them serving 2 lots, another one serving 2 lots. So if they would put a temporary culvert under construction, the culverts you're putting in would be fine, wouldn't they, after construction? Need to go to the microphone. Need to go to the microphone, please.
They would be fine.
Yeah, can you go back to the microphone since we're, sir?
Joe,
Sir, can you go back to the microphone, please?
Yes, when all the construction is done, ours would probably stand up, but they need to be longer, because I don't believe the fire department is going to be satisfied with a 30-foot entrance.
I don't remember, the fire department was at subdivision. I don't think they said anything about that, but I'm not sure we knew the
I
the
don't-
length of the culverts at
I
that
know
time
there,
either.
I know there's a spec on how wide a road has to be for their engines to make a turnaround on them. So,
Well, they're private drives. These are not roads. These are private driveways into a residential area.
right, I guess, that's,
One culvert serving 2 private drives is what it amounts to there, according to what the subdivision, what we saw at subdivision, unless I'm mistaken.
I guess that would be right, yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Well, one of the conditions of approval of the plat was, item J says Sedgwick County Fire Department advises the plat will need to comply with the Sedgwick County Service Drive Code. So I'm assuming at the time building permits are issued here, the entrances will have to meet county code. Am I understanding that correctly?
My understanding is the driveway has to be 20 feet wide to meet fire code standards.
And it has to have a certain level of gravel and subsurface and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it has to be rock.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that should satisfy, because they're 30-foot long, so, okay. I thought they needed to be longer than that, but I guess I was wrong. Okay.
Other questions from the commission? Mr.
I've
Richardson?
got a staff question here. I'm not sure what authority we have here to determine culverts as a part of this plat, because it's actually, these culverts end up on public property, do they not, as opposed to private?
Correct. To me, you have 3 options, and I'm not suggesting these in any particular order. You can go ahead and act on it however you think is appropriate based on what you've heard here today. You could defer action and ask for County Public Works to come and invite these gentlemen back and have both sides basically explain what the rules are and how it would work. Or the third option would be to modify the approval and require the applicant to comply with what they're asking for.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak on this case? Seeing none, if the agent or applicant would come back up to the podium for a 2-minute rebuttal.
I just wanted to agree with Mr. Richardson or Daly, whoever had the comment about the drives. They are just drive entrances. There's no road entrances involved. The 2 that you put in do share a drive with 2 lots. The south one shares one driveway with 2 lots. The north one that you put in shares a driveway with 2 lots. There will be a need for a third one, and it's clear up at the half section line, and it'll just be one drive reaching back to serve 3 lots once they sell them. But they're all just drive entrances. The northernmost one, if the property to the north happens to develop and dedicate another 35 feet of street right of way, making a total 70 foot of right of way running back east off of 231st, then that would engage it into being a street. And of course it would have to have regular street culvert connection and so forth and so on there. But for the present time, they're all just drive entrances, 2 of which are sharing drives, splitting off to a lot on each side. And the third one up the north, one driveway running back to serve 2 lots that are east of the first lot. I don't know if that helps any or not, but so at the present time, none of them are actually roads. I don't disagree that there probably will be more traffic during construction and all of that, but it's, anyhow. I hope that clarifies the fact that there are just 3 driveways.
Questions from the commission? Yes, Mr. Warren.
So, I think once the houses are built and people are settled, what is there would suffice, but how do you handle the issue of heavy truck for construction? Would they, if the culverts are damaged, will the owners be responsible to do the repairs, or what's your solution to that?
I don't really know. I do have 2 separate owners. Dave Rush owns the south half of this, and John Berblinger owns the north portion, and John and Dave are sharing that second drive north to serve 2 lots. I'd rather not hold up the plat, but I do want to resolve the issues with the township. So maybe we can do that, you know, on our own, getting with Dave Rush. Dave Rush was in a rush, so he may have been a little bit premature in having those culverts set ahead of time.
Mr. Klossmeyer.
Would they be willing to put in a temporary construction drive only and block off the other two until there's residences?
It wouldn't surprise me, but I haven't chatted with him about. I was unaware of this situation, so I have not talked to him about it.
Because I've built in the country quite a bit, and that's usually what we do, is just put in temporary drives until it's done, because they're absolutely right. Those culverts will be smashed.
Oh, yeah. I don't disagree with that.
Mr. Daly.
Is there somebody designated to maintain these driveways after they're built?
You know, as far as I know, just the property owner. I mean, there's going to be a shared drive agreement, and they're both responsible for the shared entrance into it. Property owners will be responsible for that, just the joint easement portion. Once it gets onto their property, then it's their own.
Thank you.
Right.
Other questions from the commission? Seeing none, thank you. And I will bring it back to the commission for action. Mr. Bill Johnson.
I'd make a motion to go ahead and approve it with the adding the temporary construction entrance drives, and also a statement in the event that the township culverts are damaged, that the owner will replace them also.
I'll second that.
I have a motion by Mr. Bill Johnson, a second by Mr. Klossmeyer. Discussion. Mr. Warren.
Staff question, does that satisfy the requirement that the owners repair any damage to the existing culverts during construction? Will it stand up? Is that an easy?
I think the best way to get it to stand up would be to clarify when the obligation ends. So I think as long as you said upon completion of construction or the completion of the building permits being finalized, something along those lines would be clean.
Then I'd just add that once they've had an occupancy permit to the residents, then it's all on them.
Mr. Klossmeyer, are you good with that?
Yes, I might clarify though, on the last house that's built?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Richardson, did you have a question?
No, I was going to follow up with a suggestion that we have county staff who come to the subdivision committee meetings, but perhaps Dale or someone contact them and have them prepared to talk about this issue, because we have lots of county plats and this typically doesn't come up. I appreciate their concerns, and maybe we need to address this going forward, but I sure wouldn't want to hold this one up because we've approved lots of these over time.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Green.
I would just like to have the motion clarified. I think I know what we're voting on, but I want to make sure that it's the way I want to vote on it.
Can we read the motion back, please?
What I've written down here, what I've written down here is that there be temporary construction entrances required for each lot, and that any damage to the culverts be repaired by the property owner prior to occupancy.
Hey, I might say one thing. I'm not sure they need to do a temporary for every lot. If they had a temporary construction entrance for the area, would suffice. Don't you agree, Bill?
Yes.
Would you like to amend the motion? I guess would be the question on that.
So it's just one construction entrance.
Yeah. Or whatever they see needed.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be two, there could be three, I don't know.
You're going to need two, I think.
That might be two.
As long as there's a temporary access to all the lots.
Mr. Bill Johnson, could you amend the motion and restate it, please?
Going to approve the plat with the understanding that there will be as many temporary accesses to the lots while the homes are being built, and in the event that one of the township culverts is damaged, the homeowners will be responsible to replace them at their cost. And up until the last house is occupied.
Mr. Klossmeyer, are you in agreement with that?
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? Mr. Daly?
Do you mean homeowners or the construction, the group that's?
Occupancy permit.
The homeowner, I'm going to say the homeowner because he's the one that's got control of the contractor.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Is it 13? 13-0. Thank you. All right, let's move on to agenda item number 4. And I think Scott's going to present to us on this.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Scott Knable with the planning staff for the record. The item before you today is a proposed amendment to the wireless communication master plan as well as amendments to the unified zoning code to implement those changes. I think that many of you were on the commission back in 2016 when the state of Kansas adopted this statute 66-2019 that established a number of mandates regarding how local governments can regulate wireless communication facilities, many of which were active programs and processes that the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County use. One of which is that local governments can no longer require that applicants demonstrate that they do not have an opportunity to co-locate on existing facilities prior to allowing construction of a new facility. We cannot prohibit what's called a speculative facility, a tower or other type of facility that's built without an actual user. We cannot evaluate the merit of co-location opportunities, even if on our own knowledge we are aware of co-location opportunities that might be available. We cannot require what's called a small cell facility, a shorter facility with smaller antennas, in lieu of a macro facility like a monopole or lattice tower in areas where the city has determined that there's visual or environmentally sensitive locations like along the Arkansas River. And we cannot require that applicants agree to permit co-location on the facilities that they build. All of these things are things that this community was doing up until the time that this statute was adopted. Not mentioned on the slide here, and I'll address this because it's been raised to me before the meeting. In this statute, there also is what's called a shot clock for review and approval of wireless communication facilities. The statute indicates that for a new facility, the community is required to review and take action on that application within 150 days. If that does not occur according to the statute, then the application is deemed approved. That's for construction of new facilities. For co-location on existing facilities, that varies between 60 and 90 days. There are provisions for what's called tolling, which is an agreement between the city or county and the applicant that allows that shot clock to be stopped during the process while things are not going along, and that will be important in a minute when I talk about the F.C.C. ruling that was brought up. To go back to the statute, the response of this commission back in 2016 was to adopt a amendment of the wireless communication master plan to address these changes that I just covered, as well as recommend adoption of amendments to the Unified Zoning Code to implement that changed plan. The Board of County Commissioners in December of 2016 adopted the Unified Zoning Code amendments, but did not adopt the Wireless Communication Master Plan that suggested that those code amendments be adopted, which was an interesting approach, but was what was done. The City Council didn't take action on either one. They indicated in December of 2016 that they intended to go to the state of Kansas and have the statute KSA 2066-2019 repealed or modified in some significant fashion. There's been, since that time, in the 2017 and 2018 legislative sessions, there's been no action taken by the legislature. I'm not even sure there's been committee hearings on anything that was particularly proposed. Fast forward to October of last year, 2018, the Federal Communication Commission issued a declaratory ruling, which went into effect on January 14th of this year, and it establishes additional mandates on local communities and how communities are permitted to regulate wireless communication facilities. The ruling itself predominantly addressed small cell facilities in the right-of-way. These are antennas that are typically placed on light poles or other types of utility poles in the right-of-way, or on their own pole that is of similar size to light poles or other types of utility poles. The F.C.C. ruling indicated that if the community is to regulate the aesthetics of those types of small cell facilities in the right-of-way, it can only do so if it publishes those aesthetic standards no later than April 14th of this year, which is why we're going forward with this process at this time. Wireless Communication Master Plan prepared in 2016 included aesthetic standards for facilities in the right-of-way, which at this point do not exist in the currently adopted wireless plan, so that would be a modification. There were also some changes related to shot clock that I'll go into in detail here. One of which is that an application has to be reviewed for completeness within 10 days. And then the most critical piece of the F.C.C. ruling regarding the shot clock is that they have stated that all authorizations a locality may require, including all aspects and steps in the siting process, are subject to that shot clock. And so one of the things, the way we have interpreted this in the past is that if you file a zoning application, we have 150 days to approve that, and then you can follow up and file a building permit, and we have 150 days to approve that. The F.C.C. has clarified and indicated that's not the case, that the community has 150 days to approve the entire application. So one of the things that we've got in the wireless plan that was noted, and I'm sure we'll have some discussion of, is that when you file the application, the way it's worded, that you should file both your zoning and your building permit applications concurrently. One of the things that I intended to include in the application for the zoning permit itself, which typically is filed first, is a tolling agreement that the applicant could submit along with their application, to where they agreed that the 150-day process would cease to be counted at the time the zoning was approved, and would then resume to be counted at time the building permit application was filed. And so that's probably a clarification that we need to make in this plan to address that option that would be available to applicants. The other thing that makes this addressing the shot clock issue incredibly important is that applicants are now allowed under the F.C.C. ruling to file one application for multiple facilities. And so that means the small cell facilities, which actually are not involved with the zoning, could have an applicant file an application for 250 locations that all would have to be reviewed within that 150-day period, because it was just one application. And I suspect that the companies that do these small cell facilities will do that. In fact, that is their preference, is to design a whole system, make a single application, get approval, and then go through the process of building those over a multi-year period. The plan itself before you would remove all requirements or statements regarding the co-location and speculative facilities. So essentially, we would be evaluating all wireless facilities on the merits of the land use in the location in which it is located. We would not be factoring in any of the communication functions of that facility. We'd simply be looking at it as a big, tall facility, and does a big, tall facility, fit in the location in which it is proposed to be located. We've changed the definitions in our plan to reflect definitions that were adopted by the state and the F.C.C. That are different than definitions that we had in our plan that date back to prior F.C.C. rulings. We treat the wireless facilities, and I should have removed that. Or should have modified this bullet point. When the county adopted the UCC amendments, we did so in a way that treated all wireless facilities the same as other structures, which created a very significant setback in the rural areas. If you recall, we had a application for a facility east of Derby where the setback requirement ended up being 700 or 800 feet from the property line. We are in this amendment changing that, and we'll propose that the county change their adoption to where the setback for a wireless structure would be equal to the structure height, which is what our compatibility setback has been previously. Another thing that we're going to do, and this will actually apply not just to wireless facilities, but to other applications. The way in which the compatibility height standard can be reduced is through a zoning adjustment. And one of the code provisions that we've put in this recommended code is allowing the Planning Commission or the governing body the ability to grant a zoning adjustment at the time they consider a zoning application, like a conditional use or those sorts of things, so that an applicant doesn't have to get approval of a conditional use, for example, to build a wireless communication facility that has a setback less than the compatibility height standard, and then have to file a second application to actually reduce that, because the way the code is written now, can only be done through administrative adjustment. And so we're making that clarification. Also allowing governing bodies to modify the supplemental use regulations, and that also would that we have by interpretation allowed the governing bodies to do that on a routine basis, and we're going to be clarifying that with specific language in the code that makes that clear, so that it's not relying on an interpretation that staff made many years ago. And then we have guidelines for both real property and the right-of-way. The guidelines for the real property are not changing from the aesthetic standards that were in the previous plan or its latest amendment. And what's shown here is the two on the left are the preferred design. If there is what's called an antenna array, where the antennas are not flush mounted to the tower itself, then that tower should be a monopole. If the antennas are attached directly to the tower and do not extend beyond the boundaries of the tower, and then the type of lattice tower that is on the left of this image would be permitted. And then the image on the right, where you have a lattice tower with antenna arrays extending beyond the tower, that would be a discouraged type of design. Likewise, in the right-of-way, we would be encouraging the antennas, which are the very top of these images is the antenna itself, that these antennas should be mounted on existing poles. We shouldn't be adding additional poles to our right-of-way. We should be replacing the poles that are there and adding an antenna to the top of it, which is what's shown on the left, where you have an existing light pole where they've added antenna to the top, and shouldn't do what's shown on the right, where you have an additional pole added to the right-of-way solely for the purpose of mounting a wireless antenna. So the recommendation is that you approve the resolution that you have in your packet that adopts the wireless communication master plan, and then recommend that the implementing provisions or changes to the Unified Zoning Code be adopted by the governing bodies. That I'll stand for questions.
Richardson.
Scott, are we changing the compatibility, the height setbacks from the height of the tower, to the height of the tower from these others because of the F.C.C. or the state mandate? Is that?
Well, the original proposal that was adopted from a zoning standpoint by the county in 2016, the way we understood the statute is that we were required to treat wireless facilities the same as we treated other buildings. The setback for a structure that's not a wireless facility from a compatibility standpoint, and this relates to properties that are zoned for two-family or single-family development only, not other types of properties, results in a setback for a structure that's as tall as many of these structures to be 600, 700, 800 feet, which is certainly not practical in an urban area, and so we would end up waiving those entirely. And we've, in discussing and reviewing the statute, it's in our opinion that it does not require us to treat wireless structures the same way we treat other structures, but requires us not to discriminate, if you will, so that we feel like having a more favorable treatment to the wireless facility meets the intention of the statute, as long as it's not a more onerous requirement.
And is the county would adopt identical regulations to the city?
That would be our desire, yes.
That's not guaranteed, but that'd be our desire.
Yes, that's correct. Right now, our current zoning code has the prior to 2016 regulations in it that apply only to the city of Wichita, most of which is contrary to state law and unenforceable. And the county, and then a duplicate numbered provisions, but with different text that apply in the unincorporated area. So we would like to clean that up.
And the light poles are owned by the city, are they not?
It depends.
It depends.
Yes.
Some of which are owned by Westar?
Yes, there's many of the light poles themselves are owned by Westar. That's correct, but not all of them.
And how does that work with? Does Westar have to allow them to?
That's correct.
Co-locate
yes,
those,
and they would have to get a permit from the city as well.
So both would have to be involved in order to get.
That's correct. Yeah, the amount that is paid to locate on one of these poles makes it very unlikely that Westar is not going to agree to that.
I see. And what would that amount be?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, anything more than zero for something where somebody else pays all the cost is going to be a pretty profitable venture.
Okay. It's more than zero. Okay.
Mr. Foster.
Scott, I've got several questions, just some clarification on things and just a couple of typos.
Okay.
On the background page, page 1, the next to last line refers to the statute. I assume that's statute?
Yes, I'm sure it is. You said which page?
Page 1, next to bottom line. Then on page 2, just below the midpoint of the page, it refers to issued a declaratory ruling that establishes. I assume you'd lose one of the that's there.
Yes. Okay.
On page 8, items 4 and 6. Is the language a little bit weak when it just refers to should be?
Well, these are, this provision, or this document is a policy document, the wireless plan is. The corresponding paragraph to those two items in the zoning code states shall.
Okay, so you're comfortable leaving it should be then?
Yes, I think is required to be should, because this is just a amendment, this is just a comprehensive plan element. It does not have the force of law. It's just a policy.
Okay. Then on page 12, item number 3, where it talks about the wiring, the last sentence there, facility wiring should not cross over, under, or through private property. You know, in that ruling, it talks about neutrality and utilities will be treated the same, and that got me to think, what about easements that are located on private property? Doesn't that need clarified?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So would they then be allowed to run through those easements?
I believe so, yes.
Private property? Okay. Then down there on item number 5 on public safety, it refers to the clear zone. My understanding on clear zone is it's 6 foot off of the curb line for right-of-ways, but are there other types of clear zones such that this needs defined?
The that is the intention is the clear zone of site obstructions as it relates to private drives. That is what that means.
Well, will that be a problem for the folks trying to interpret that? They'll need to go track down what a clear zone is.
I hope not, because they wrote it.
Then up there on the next page, page 13, item 6 there, place facilities and locations to do not hinder. Should that be to not hinder?
It should. I think it should be that do not.
That do not. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then on item number 7, I want to make sure to understand the height of facilities should not exceed 10% of the height of existing structures in the right-of-way. Well, if you look at the definition of facilities, it says including the support structure. And so does that mean, let's say a 50-foot was the number, and that you couldn't have a support structure that's taller than 5 feet?
No, it would be 10% above. So that's probably the thing that you're missed, that we should clarify there. So it'd be 55 feet in that circumstance.
I would suggest some clarification on that.
Mm-hmm.
Then another question, that same number 7 there, is it references are located within 1 block. Does that mean in all directions, so you'd go across the street as well? And how do you define a block? Is it the block that it's on?
Blocks are defined by intersections of streets, and yes, it would be in all directions.
Okay, so it's going to be whatever block it's on. It's not, it could be a 300, it could be a 500, whatever.
It could be a 1,200, it could be a 2,000-foot dome block, yes.
I guess the final thought I have is I think you've done a really good job here of putting all this technical information into a very concise document. So thanks to staff on that. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the commission? Mr. Richardson.
Just to clarify about easements on private property, I mean, is this considered a utility so that you, in theory, could put one of these in a person's backyard?
No, it is not considered a utility for that purpose based on the definition of a wireless communication facility. You can build these on private property, and there are a number of ways in which you can get permission to do so, but it would not be, it's not the equivalent of a power pole.
It's not, so it's not considered a utility for a within a utility easement
That's correct.
find
Although
on plats.
as Commissioner Foster pointed out, the power that supplies it or the telephone line that supplies it are utilities and would, I think, be allowed to go across private property in an easement.
So, as an example, you could have one of these adjacent to a private property, and you might end up with another trench in your backyard because they're going to supply power to it, but the tower itself is not going to be in that easement.
That's correct.
Okay.
Other questions from the commission? Okay, is there anybody from the audience that would like to get up and make public comment on this?
Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Greg Ferris. I really wasn't here for this issue, but I wasn't aware of it, so that's why I wasn't here. On page 14, I've got a couple concerns. Item number 6, the appearance of a proposed facility shown in a site context by photo simulations. Current requirement is that photo simulations are required in environmentally or otherwise sensitive areas, which is fine. That makes sense. When these were originally drafted years ago, nobody really knew all that much about what cell towers look like. Everybody knows what a cell tower looks like. If you're putting a cell tower in the middle of a commercial or industrial property, go to the expense and time and effort of photo sims, to me, seems a little bit redundant and unnecessary. I think that having them required in environmentally sensitive areas as defined by what your maps have those makes sense, but otherwise I don't think it does and think that should be deleted. The other area I have in concern, and Scott addressed it, but I'm not sure that, and maybe nobody really understands it. When you apply for zoning, you get the zoning, and then you go through another process, which is the F.C.C. process, and that process takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. The reason why most people don't do that before they get zoning is that it costs between $25,000 and $50,000 to go through that F.C.C. process, because you have to go through a lot of environmental studies, and you have to notify every Indian tribe that was ever in the region and wait 30 or 60 days for their responses. So that process takes some time. The other issue you have is that a building permit in the city of Wichita is good for 6 months. Now, you can usually get a 6-month extension, but it's not mandatory that you get a 6-month extension. So if I apply for a building permit and the zoning at the same time, most companies aren't going to be willing to invest that large number, not knowing they're going to get zoning for sure. Then you get your building permit the same day. My building permit may not be good by the time I get my F.C.C. approvals. So I think that, and Scott, you alluded to that you may be able to waive out of that, and if that's possible. I mean, that it should be may, and that if somebody wants to expedite this process and they don't care about spending that $50,000 or $60,000 and they want to do it all at the same time, fine, let them do it. But they shouldn't have to do that, and most people aren't going to want to do that. The other side is there's a little bit of a downside for the city if you do it that way, because if I'm a carrier or somebody else that's invested $50,000 and you deny my zoning, we're going to court. Absolutely going to court when you deny. So every cell tower that is denied in the city of Wichita will end up in court because you've spent too much money not to. So I think that, getting a little bit more reasonable makes sense. I understand the F.C.C. has put a 150-day timetable on there, but I think you can work around that. So I just appreciate it if you consider those things. I'm glad to answer any questions.
From the commission. And thank you, Mr. Ferris. Would anybody else from the audience like to make a comment on this case? Yes? If you'd state your name and address, please, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thanks for listening to me. I'm Susan Cunningham, and I just have a couple of questions I'd like clarified. This law came out, and the F.C.C., all the F.C.C. references to it usually reference right-of-way, public property, and small cell. And I think in the presentation, there was a reference about right-of-way, public property, and real property. I'd like to see some clarifications as to whether we're talking about private property and whether or not what part of this wireless master plan are we leaving? Are we leaving in the part that protects private property or the river corridor or sensitive areas? Because we had that in the original. But is this a replacement or are you just making changes? I'd like to have that clarified.
Scott, you want to clarify that, please?
Sure, I'll get up and talk after everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions from the commission? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Scott, do you want to get up and thank you, please?
Okay, well, let's start with the visually and environmentally sensitive locations. The Kansas statute has expressly prohibited a locality from using that sort of technique to require different application requirements. Greg is right that we used to require photo simulations only in those circumstances, unless it was determined by the planning director that photo simulations should be required. And so that's why we've made this change, is because of that state statute that does not allow us to limit that. I agree that sometimes a photo simulation probably isn't necessary, but I would say at least half the case it is a helpful tool for people in the notification area to understand the context and the scale of the facility that's being proposed. That gets at the second speaker's action or request to know whether we will continue to have those protections in visually and environmentally sensitive locations, which were identified in the previous plan, and we will not, because we cannot. And so that is one of the changes. The plan that is proposed is a amendment of the current plan, and the changes that are included in it are all of the items that I discussed, all of which are being done because of mandates from the state and federal level. And so we are responding to that. Regarding the F.C.C. shot clock determination, in their declaratory ruling, there's several pages on clarifying what they mean by that shot clock. And while I agree that it is a pain and we would rather not have applications submitted for both building permit and zoning at the same time, we cannot process a zoning. We cannot take the risk of processing a zoning and a building permit application within 150 days when the applicant controls, if we allow the applicant to control when they file that second part of the permit. And so given the state law saying that if we do not act within 150 days, the easiest way to get approval is to file your zoning application, and then 151 days later say, you know, hey, I've been approved, but I don't even have to get a building permit from you because it's 151 days. So I can just build this thing. Your building permit that I never filed for is just deemed approved by statute.
Richardson.
Scott, along those lines, we talked about this tolling and stopping the clock.
Yes.
Would it be possible for the applicant to say,
yeah, and that's,
and there's a delay, and therefore I'll not start this clock until we're ready for the building permit, for example?
I think the way I would modify this paragraph, the last paragraph on page 14, is that an application for a building permit should be submitted concurrently unless the applicant agrees, submits a tolling agreement for the building permit.
Okay, so that would be up to them then if they decide.
Right, they could make that choice. they could submit with their zoning application a tolling permit, a tolling agreement that states that at the time the zoning process concludes, the shot clock stops and it doesn't restart until they filed their building permit.
Foster. Oh, sorry. Did you have a? Foster.
God, I had made a note on page 13. It says, and this is related to the submittal requirements. It says this plan suggests the following submittal requirements. Well, you know, we've got the 6 items over here, and I had made a note, well, what if they're doing something in the right-of-way? Why is that going to need a landscape or a screening plan? So
the landscape and screening plan in the right-of-way would be for the communication equipment that is associated with the antennas. That communication equipment is typically mounted on the ground.
I understand. That's not my question, but my question is, if it's just suggesting these items for submittal, who is going to make that determination? Let's say you made it so the zoning administrator would make a determination of what's going to get submitted. Does that not get you crossways with the statute in terms of not giving equal treatment?
I guess I'm not understanding your question.
Well, let's say somebody brought in something and it really did not need a photo simulation. It just wasn't warranted. If a zoning administrator made a determination, you don't need to do number 6. Does that get crossways with the statute of not having treated all applications fairly and consistent?
I don't think it would automatically be considered unfair, no. I think the potential on every single application that we process is there for there to be a determination by the courts that the staff or the planning commission or the governing body treated the application unfairly. But in my 25 plus years here, that's never happened.
Who would make the determination of the 6 items there for the submittal? Is it the zoning administrator?
Yeah, actually it's the director of planning, is according to the zoning code, determines the submittal requirements and makes the determination whether or not an application is complete.
Okay, well, I think this works well then, gives you some flexibility. So.
Other questions from the commission? Seeing none, I will look to the commission for some action.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve as presented in whatever, Scott, whatever small amendments that were suggested.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. McKay, a second by Mr. Warren. Other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 13-0.
One more question for Scott.
Mr. Richardson has another question for staff.
Scott, other communities in Sedgwick County, do they have their own wireless master plans, or are they going to be under the purview of the county? How do they all do that?
So the other 19 municipalities do have their own zoning codes and their own adopted plans. I have to admit, I'm not aware of any that have a specific wireless master plan like Wichita and Sedgwick County do, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But yes, all of the communities in the entire country should be doing this right now.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to agenda item number 5, case number CON 2018-00045. And it looks like Dave, oh, was that consent? I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
It does say consent on my paper. Just so you know.
Go to BZA meeting.
So yeah, let's adjourn the MAPC, and we will move on into the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals. Agenda item number 1, BZA 2018-00072. And is there anybody from the commission that would like to hear this case? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that would like to hear this case? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hartman, no, Mr. Joe Johnson, and a second by Mr. Green. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 13-0. And with no other business, we are adjourned.